Welcome back to History of the Ancient Near East. I'm Justin Singleton. Now, we're still in the early Bronze Age, but as we enter into the Levant, I want to split the Levant between the northern and southern regions. And as we continue the lectures, the reasoning for this will become apparent. While discussing the early Bronze Age in the northern Levant, we'll be working through Early Bronze 1, or EB1, through Early Bronze 4, discussing small villages, trade networks, and finally, the North's surviving the southern collapse. I also want to point out that this lecture may be a little shorter than others. I've tried to work through this one quite a few times, but as you may have noticed, I talk kind of fast at times. And that's usually because I'm getting excited about the lecture. So I'm going to try to slow it down, and we'll see how it works out. Thanks for sticking with me. While the Neolithic is defined by a move to agricultural village life, the Bronze Age is arbitrarily defined by its use of metals. Of course, that's a pretty complicated definition. For many cultures, the use of specific metals occurred before the designated Bronze or Iron Ages. Copper, for instance, from which bronze is made, very often being used earlier. Perhaps better defining moments in Bronze Age societies is a movement toward urbanism, craft specialization, and interregional trade. At least, these can be well understood in the northern Levant, so far as northern Levantine chronology has been developed. Whereas the southern Levant covers the modern nations of Israel, Jordan, and Sinai in Egypt, the northern Levant primarily covers the modern countries of Lebanon and Syria, with very minimal parts of Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, and Israel included. Or, more specifically, from the Amanus Mountains in Turkey, to the Jebel Ansuriya in Syria, to the Lebanon mountain ranges in the south. Basically, the northern Levant is the Mediterranean coast above Canaan. Now, during the Bronze Age, like the entirety of the Bronze Age, key trade networks are formed at Ebla, Byblos, and Ugarit, the collapse of which would lead ultimately to the establishment of the Tyrian dominance, or the Phoenician dominance, in the Mediterranean during the Iron Age. Unfortunately, there's a general lack of understanding of the northern Levant in the earlier periods. But genetic research shows that throughout the entirety of the early Bronze Age, gene flow did occur, likely from neighboring regions such as Mesopotamia or Anatolia. At the beginning of the third millennium, the northern Levant had not yet been discovered by outsiders concerned with the region's resources, and it had not yet become an intermediate between east and west, or even north and south. Remembering that the early Bronze Age emerges from the simpler agricultural life of the earlier periods, early Bronze Age 1 in the region existed as a series of small, unwalled villages, though at the beginning stages of EB1, the people still tended toward mobility. Now, Ugarit, having been established in the Neolithic, had become a rather substantial town by EB1. But other important sites, like Ebla, were not founded for quite some time. By the end of EB1, the before mentioned small unwalled villages were spread thinly across the region. Social groups were small and separated. Craft specialization was limited. And although long-distance trade was minimal, there was a willingness to interact with the outside world, all of which brought the region into the defining characteristics of the Bronze Age, and led to the major trade networks that began in EB2-3. Now, the latter part of EB1, known as EB1b, has been termed proto-urban because of this move toward urbanism. By early Bronze 2-3, villages in northern Jordan became nucleated and centered on hilltops and key rivers, with over 50% within 500 meters of a river system. Interregional trade was not yet a hallmark of the northern Levant and EB2, though it did exist, as evidenced by Sidonian craftsmanship in Egypt. The collapse of the Uruk-ian settlements, like Uruk, Mesopotamia, the collapse of the Uruk-ian settlements in northern Syria led to a migration away from the northern Levant, and ultimately into the southern Levant, leading to a rise of urbanism in the south. This migration led to a population influx in that region, and leftover Early Bronze II sites in the north, such as Tel Fadaus Kfar Abida in northern coastal Lebanon, consist of simple dwellings. Now, many of these early Bronze II sites will later be reoccupied in Early Bronze IV. By Early Bronze III, urbanism is in full force across the Levant, including fortifications and public buildings. Though limited in size, coastal settlements such as Byblos and Tel Arqa flourish at this time. The region of the northern Levant became a prime mover in goods, particularly the wool trade. Along with bridging both the east and west and now the north and south, differing prestige goods such as ivory, tin, gold, and lapis lazuli act as evidence of such contacts. Coastal sites lacked written documents, so very little of the political organization is known, but the fortifications and public buildings in such small sites suggest complexity, and Egyptian contact is well documented through a series of artifacts found there. Now, Ebla, having its origins in Early Bronze III, became a well-established mercantile empire by Early Bronze IV, the zenith of its political power. Excavations at the Royal Palace G at Ebla revealed a wealth of information. Dating to Early Bronze IVA, the Royal Palace G palatial system appears to have been an outgrowth of an earlier EB3 system, particularly an economical system, but possibly even a political system, suggesting a progression toward sophistication. Now, perhaps the most monumentous aspect of Eblite culture, and one that you have likely already heard of, is the enormous collection of written texts that it's left behind, including 1,750 complete texts, 4,900 large fragments, and thousands of smaller ones. Dating to the 24th century BC, these used the cuneiform script that had spread to the Levant from Mesopotamia. It should also be noted that EB4 in the southern Levant was a catastrophic time of urban collapse. But the north survived this collapse, and in fact went through a second type of urban revolution. Tel Arqa not only contained a dense urban center, but that urban center included multi-storied housing. Byblos, too, continued through the EB4 desolation, its temples showing continued use from EB3 into the Middle Bronze Age. The urban revival and the rise of Ebla was most likely due to the Eblite affinity to Mesopotamian culture and language, and of course the resources at hand. And sites in the northern Levant continued long-distance trade, such as the before-mentioned Byblos and Tel Arqa, who continued trade with Egypt, and Ebla, who, surprise, surprise, continued trade with Mesopotamia. These northern Levantine cities had as their source of wealth their own internal agricultural and pastoral production systems, trading their local products like textiles. In contrast to the old citadel towns in the south, the northern cities, with their economic boom, attracted many to the lucrative sites, which only furthered their economic prowess, while others in the south found it feasible to basically let go of the city life and simply trade with the northern cities, particularly the South's valuable wool. This rather valuable relationship between the North and the South is likely a key factor to the South's shift toward pastoralism. Ebla, during its prime, was punitive toward its own allies who failed to follow Ebla's policies. And in fact, the Ebla texts record the military campaigns of a vizier by the name of Ibrahim, who broadened Ebla's borders through conquests. It would appear that the Eblite kings held the empire together with a strong hand, though conquest of the southern Levant was never really needed, as the southern people actually wanted to trade with their northern neighbors. Ultimately, Ebla was destroyed by fire around 2250 BC, and several hypotheses have been put forward as to who destroyed the city. One hypothesis includes the city of Mari, which had been attacked by a rather large allied group that was led by Ebla. In this hypothesis, Mari simply retaliated against Ebla for war that had weakened both kingdoms. Another hypothesis includes the city of Armi, a city that was possibly the last site conquered by Ebla. In this hypothesis, Ebla was destroyed by internal conflict, but possibly with the help of the Akkadians. A final hypothesis is that Ebla was destroyed by Naram-Sin of the Akkadian Empire, particularly as an inscription attributed to Naram-Sin boasts of destroying a city named Ebla or Ibla. But this theory, too, has its problems. Interestingly, whoever it was that destroyed Ebla, social complexity and, in fact, urbanism continue after the destruction of the empire. Ebla itself, though reduced from its former status, was rebuilt and continued into the early Bronze 4B period. And the city even continued in trade during Ur III in Mesopotamia. By the Old Babylonian period, Ebla flourished again. Now, I'd like to thank you all for sticking with me through this journey. Please feel free to reach out to me with any comments or questions.